Hi, everybody. Welcome to the call this evening. This is Liz Butler. I'm the Organizing and Strategic Alliance Vice President for Friends of the Earth. We're super excited that you're joining us this evening for us to talk about kind of the moment that we're in, the large campaign that we're launching to really go after Pruitt and get him fired, because it's time that we actually stand up to him. So the purpose of the call tonight is really to give a sense of what exactly does it mean, how are we going to be standing up to Pruitt, how are we moving members of Congress to do that. Obviously, many of you have joined us over the last several months as we've actually worked to hold senators accountable to stop the direct draconian funding cuts Trump and the Republicans proposed for the Environmental Protection Agency's budget, which is really their way of trying to overturn environmental laws without actually taking a vote. Our work included national days of action, organizing rallies, petition events, honkin' waves, letter deliveries, and more outside of local senator offices. In total, we had hundreds of thousands of people sign petitions, make calls, and over 1,500 people planned in-person letter delivery and events at Senate offices in 40 cities, all calling on the senators to really stand up and protect the EPA. But now it's a time for us to really have a new phase of our work. We're going to be really kind of laying out the case to you as to why we've made the decision to call for Congress to fire the EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, and we'll be going into that at greater detail. Then we're also going to be talking about how you can get involved in this effort and the organizing work that we're going to be doing out in communities across the country. Now, we realize that so much has been happening from the Trump administration recently on environmental issues, on social justice issues, on racial justice issues, and economic justice issues. You know, we've seen everything from the horrible tragedy in Florida that then really has caused a popular uprising, including the largest school walkouts in U.S. history and the upcoming March for Our Lives. But for some reason, that's still not enough for the Trump administration or Republicans in Congress to take action on guns such as assault rifles. It's been very clear that Trump and Republicans in Congress are basically in the back pocket of the NRA. And so despite the clear demand from across the country, they're not taking action right now on this critical issue. Over this last weekend, we have all faced renewed concerns about our democracy, given Trump and his lawyers' direct attacks on Special Prosecutor Mueller. And because of that, Friends of the Earth has joined the Committed Rapid Response Network that's known as Above the Law, that's planning on organizing in rapid response if there's any effort done to take away the special prosecutor's ability to finish his investigation. And so that hopefully won't come to bear, but there's a lot of concerns in the wake of this last weekend. We've also seen Trump and his allies in Congress both cause the DACA crisis and then refuse to take any action to solve it, despite the fact that we have over 1 million youth in this country that our states are now left in the balance. This Friday, we could actually have a government shutdown because they haven't been really doing their job governing and funding the government. So even though it seems like every month we're back in this situation, it's because they haven't fundamentally done the basic job of passing a budget to keep the lights on in the government. And, you know, it seems like weekly we're having scandals from the heads of other agencies, including energy, HUD, education, and then we'll be going into, on a much deeper level, what's been happening at the EPA. So we're extremely excited that you guys have joined us to really talk about how we can bring our energy together and really stand up to Pruitt and make sure that his main goal of dismantling the EPA is stopped in its tracks. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to turn it over to Lucas, who's the campaigner who's really driving the efforts to launch the new campaign to fire Pruitt and has been working on the EPA and its budget for months. Lucas?
Hey, thanks, Liz, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. So yeah, let's talk about Scott Pruitt, and let's talk about getting Scott Pruitt fired. I think just like at first a little bit of background. The only place that this conversation can start is if we acknowledge that Scott Pruitt is the most dangerous administrator in the history of the Environmental Protection Agency, and I don't say this lightly. After Trump, very possibly the most dangerous person in America. You have to kind of look at his career and his origins as the Attorney General of Oklahoma to sort of wrap your head around what exactly has been happening at the EPA for the last 12 months. This is a guy whose career basically started as someone who sues the EPA and other federal agencies on behalf of Big Oil. And in return for that work that he did in Oklahoma, Big Oil bankrolled his re-election campaign, gave very generously to his personal super PAC, and I think most importantly put him on the radar of national Republicans so that when Trump won, he emerged very early and very quickly as Big Oil's first choice for the job at EPA. They knew that this was a guy who had committed himself to dismantling the agency from the outside. They wanted him to finish the job from the inside. So when you just acknowledge the fact that this is Big Oil's lawyer trying to hurt the agency in the same way that he did from the outside to try to limit it from performing basic tasks around limiting pollution from power plants, from oil wells, from pretty much every source of industrial emissions that you can imagine. That was his job outside. He's now implementing that agenda from the inside. Now, I have to admit, and this sort of like alludes to what Liz was saying before, when we first came on the scene, we initially thought that the budget was going to be the biggest and most important thing that they would go after. We thought that with good reason that unified control of the federal government would be used to cut the EPA to the bone, to the point that it couldn't do its basically legally required jobs, to like end the agency as we know it without going after any of the bedrock environmental laws that are still keeping us all safe to some extent. But as it turns out, they didn't succeed very well at trying to cut the agency, and on that point we have some good news. The Trump administration opened with this plan to cut the EPA by over 30%, which would have ended the agency as we know it. And right now it's overwhelmingly clear that Trump and Pruitt aren't going to get that. Thanks to a very strong concerted push, particularly targeted at the Senate, the agenda to cut the EPA was pretty much stopped in its tracks. And I guess like this is a good point to like acknowledge that the work that many of the people did who are on the call right now. We made the EPA cuts an uncrossable red line. And by and large, Democrats saw that and were afraid to negotiate on anything that would lead to cuts to the EPA. So, before we get into anything else, we should acknowledge that and acknowledge our power and acknowledge the good work that we've already done. So now a little bit of bad news. Stopping EPA cuts is good. A funded EPA is better than an EPA that's been deliberately starved. But that's not really enough. And I think what we've been realizing now is that so long as Scott Pruitt has a job, none of our environmental protections are going to be safe. We need to start from that. And just to like throw out a couple of examples, just about 2 weeks ago, he put out this report where he bragged that in only 12 months, he had overseen the dismantling of 22 discrete environmental regulations. That's very quick work, and to be honest, like when we looked at the EPA's agenda a year ago, we didn't think they would be able to move this quickly. Under him, enforcement actions have completely collapsed. If you look at the numbers, they have only lodged 48 cases against polluters. This is basic kind of bread and butter stuff that you would expect the EPA to do. Are they finding people, or are they finding factories when they spill? Are they doing investigations into who's emitting more than their permits allow? That kind of basic thing that is like the enforcement of our underlying environmental laws. They've only done 48 cases since they started a year ago. To give you a frame of reference, in the first year of the Bush administration, they'd lodged 118 cases against polluters. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that Pruitt himself is centralizing power around himself and his political appointees, to the point that staff can't actually even make inquiries of regulated entities like factories without first going through the DC office. It's unprecedented, and it's unclear if it's even legal, but that's a different matter. You also get things like him suspiciously meeting with executives from Dow Chemicals, and then a few weeks later reversing an EPA ban on a pesticide that's known to cause brain and nerve disease in children. It's unprecedented stuff. So where we need to begin from, and what we're here to talk about tonight, is how do we get rid of him? How do we fire Scott Pruitt? I think under normal circumstances, there's an understanding that cabinet officials like Pruitt serve at the pleasure of the president. Yeah, well, that isn't going to help us very much right now. Even if Trump were well-balanced, I think the important thing to understand is that he is one of Trump's favorites. He has been very effective in an administration that's otherwise been totally dysfunctional. If you point to his work, it's actually one of the few things that's going well. And, more disturbingly, who are Trump's actual constituents? It's the pesticide companies, it's the oil companies, it's the coal companies. These are all the people who Pruitt gets up and works for every day. They're his constituents, they're Trump's constituents. And as long as he is pursuing that agenda, it's going to be very difficult, impossible even, for us to imagine driving a wedge between him and Trump. So what does that leave us with? It leaves us with Congress, which for us is the most important target right now. Just to put it very simply, we need lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans, to know that Pruitt is totally unacceptable. We need them to block his remaining nominees. We need them constantly calling for independent investigations. We need them calling or demanding for his resignation. And this is the essential piece. We need them to be prepared to introduce and support articles of impeachment against Scott Pruitt next year if Congress flips. I didn't actually know this until recently, but the same procedures for impeachment against the president apply to cabinet members, and it's something that we're looking at very closely right now and are building a legal case for. I think that in going about this work, there are a couple of things that we need to be very cognizant of. One is that the Senate matters a lot. I think a couple of months ago we saw something very important happen where both the senators from North Carolina weighed in against one of Pruitt's remaining nominees, the person who was going to be put in charge of supervising pesticides and toxics. He was, unsurprisingly, a pesticides lobbyist. But when Republicans started to weigh in against him, the nomination was withdrawn. So there is important work for all of us in every state, wherever you are. And I think that there are two things that I would want to pull out here. The first is that we need to make it very clear to Democrats, whether or not they win in November, that we need to be starting from the point that Pruitt has committed fireable offenses and that they are not doing their jobs unless they are actively moving towards a place where he doesn't have a job anymore, where all he has is a one-way ticket back to Oklahoma. It just needs to be taken for granted. So far, they've been doing very good work, expressing disdain for everything that he's done, investigating some of his crimes, but they aren't really at a place yet where they are saying openly and in public, this guy has to go. And that's where we need to get them, and that's part of the energy that we're trying to build and get started tonight. The other half of this is Republicans, and as I just alluded to, that they aren't immune to Scott Pruitt's corruption. He's an incredibly toxic guy, and we need to elevate that. We need to do everything we can to make Republicans feel like they can't be in the same room with him. They need to see that he is such a dangerous political liability that their only choice is to start saying that, we don't agree with him on everything, but it seems like he's lost the faith of his staff, he's lost the faith of the American people. Maybe it would be better if he just, quit early. So those are the things that I think are important at this point, but there is a note of urgency that I kind of want to end on here, which is that we really can't afford to delay this work any longer. We can't wait until 2020 for sure. We can't even wait until next November. We need to get in a place where everyone is saying the same thing, and that is Scott Pruitt shouldn't have a job anymore. And we need to begin the process of delegitimizing him and creating the political will so that eventually, when there is a critical mass, we can actually weigh him down enough that it does actually end his reign as administrator. And I think that like Liz is about. I'm going to punt it back to Liz now with that, and she's going to talk about some of the specific strategies we're going to be employing to build that critical mass of pressure.
Thanks, Lucas. Before I even go through the calendar and talk about the different strategies and opportunities for you to engage in, I wanted to add two things to what Lucas said. One is, many of you have probably seen this in the news in the last week or so, but the thing about Scott Pruitt is he's not just an anti-environmentalist, he's also very corrupt, which he keeps proving time and time again, a racist, a climate denier. He would be bad in any part of the government. He's especially bad right now under the EPA. The reason I lift that up is there has been a lot in the articles about how Trump wants to fire Sessions in order to get rid of the special prosecutor, and that if he did that, one of the top short lists that comes up in every single article is actually moving Pruitt from EPA into that position. So that's super scary and means that this isn't just a fight for folks who care about what exactly he's doing in the EPA. This is a fight for anyone who cares about our democracy, because the more that we work to undermine Scott Pruitt's power, the less likely that he would be the lapdog who's moved over to the Attorney General role in order to shut down any investigations on the Trump administration. So that's super scary. Scary thing number two, it has come out in recent articles, including the New York Times, that part of the reason that Pruitt is being such a good sort of follower of Trump is that he thinks that the next president after the Trump administration will be the Pruitt administration. That should just scare you to the bone. The idea that he thinks he can help Trump win again in 2020 with designs to run himself in 2024. So as you're thinking about the importance of you engaging in this campaign, think about what it means for the environment. Think about what it means, what he's doing in communities and undermining the necessary work of the laws that were passed over many decades that guide the EPA's work and how illegal it is to not implement those laws. But also think about the idea that he could actually be the person that's instituted as Attorney General with designs on ending the special prosecutor's investigation, and that he fancies himself ultimately kind of finishing the job that the Trump administration starts as president in 2024. Makes everything that we're talking about tonight and everything we do in the ensuing months that much more urgent and critical for all of us to engage in. So let's talk about some of the things that we're going to be doing coming up so that you can also see ways that you can engage in the campaign. So if we kind of think about this over the next few months, the first thing that we're going to do is we're working to try and make sure that we get senators on record about their stance on firing Pruitt. So we're going to actually be asking many of you on the phone, key activists and communities, to actually do lobby meetings in district with senators and representatives and ask them directly whether or not they would commit to firing Pruitt, and also do them at public events and town hall meetings, thinking about the upcoming congressional recess periods that are happening in March and April. The second thing is we're going to be working to really demonstrate that there's organizations across the country and deep in the states that agree with it's time to fire Pruitt. These are environmental organizations, social justice organizations, community groups, churches. So in order to really demonstrate the depth and breadth of organizations that really care about this issue, we're going to be organizing a sign-on letter over the next 6 weeks that we'll be delivering to senators right before Earth Day on April 22nd. The letter will be calling on Congress to take action to have Pruitt removed as soon as possible. The next really big thing that we're doing is really demonstrating how many individual people across the country and communities also agree with this. And in order to do that, we're going to be collecting signatures for our Fire Pruitt petition to show that there's just a wide array of public support for firing Pruitt. We'll be collecting signatures through tabling and canvassing and holding informational events and more, showing up at events that are planned in communities, such as in many communities, there's Earth Day events that are happening on April 22nd, as well as Earth Month events that happen throughout April, where we have volunteers, and we're hoping many of you will volunteer to do this as well, to be directly collecting petition signatures and getting more folks involved. In addition to that, that same petition is going to be launched digitally. So working to get people online to sign the petition so that we can just really demonstrate a huge amount of support. And the final couple of things that we're doing is, one, we're going to start kind of showing up when Scott Pruitt is speaking or out at events and really making sure that we can directly confront him and show and ask him why he's so corrupt and why he's working to undermine the EPA's very mission. All of this will lead up to a National Day of Action on May 9th, which happens to be Scott Pruitt's birthday, where we're going to be doing a bunch of things. We're going to be holding events out in communities to deliver the petition signatures to the senators' offices that have been gathered over the last couple of months. And then a very particular event that we're going to do here in D.C. is we're going to be fundraising to pay for and deliver a one-way first-class ticket to Pruitt back home to Oklahoma for good. And really, since he seems to fancy taking first-class trips, we'd like to send him on his last trip out of D.C. and encourage him to go home and not come back. So all of these are events and actions that we're going to want to pull you into and get you involved in, so we can just really show the depth and breadth of what's necessary in this moment, which is firing Scott Pruitt. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Britton, who is going to lead us in a quick question and answer session. Britton?
Great. Thanks, Liz. My name's Britton. I'm a regional organizer with Friends of the Earth, and we have a lot of people in the call, so we won't be able to get to all your questions. But if you do have a question for Lucas or Liz, you can press 1 on your telephone pad, and I will unmute you. And we only have time for one round of questions right now, but we will do another round at the end of the call. So if we can't get you this first round, we'll try to get you through the second round. So if you have a question, go ahead and press 1 on your keypad. But I do want to get to one question that was posted in our web interface chat. If you are using the web interface chat, you can post your question in there. It's from Jeff Daly, who says, all laws are passed by Congress only. The president can issue executive orders, but it is still up to Congress to make any changes or affect sections of any law Pruitt is responsible for. So how can this be enforced under the Constitution, and how can we remove all of the lobbyists from interfering with the lawmaking? Lucas or Liz?
Lucas, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that there are important legal avenues that have already been taken against Scott Pruitt. I think that he's being sued. He's being sued a lot, and some of those lawsuits have definitely delayed the peeling back of regulations that he's really wanted to get rid of. I think at the point that we're at right now, in a lot of cases, our environmental laws aren't always our friends, just in the sense that they give the administrator, the EPA, really quite a lot of discretion to, undo things that previous administrators of the EPA already did. So a lot of these questions are being sort of settled in court, but I prefer to think of it as coming down to basic political questions and questions of political power. We can only get Scott Pruitt out as administrator, if we're willing to wage a fairly ruthless political campaign to end his political legitimacy. I think that that's the thing to keep in mind right now, and it's sort of what the work we're doing now. The lawyers are going to for years now, we can expect a back and forth over what's happening, but the more important question, I think, is not how we beat Pruitt in court, but how we get rid of him. Which is where I would definitely agree with you completely on the question of lobbyists. That's also that's something that we would need to fix, hopefully when we have, strong progressive majorities in Congress, so that we can actually pass, meaningful campaign finance reform, so that, people like Pruitt don't get elected, and, other people aren't able to be influenced in the way that Pruitt was, whether he was in Oklahoma or when he was in Oklahoma, and our, lawmakers are still influenced now.
Great. Thanks for answering that. So we've got a lot of hands up. What I'm going to do is unmute a few people at a time, and you can ask your questions of Lucas or Liz. We'll get all the questions out on the table, and then we'll kick it back to Lucas and Liz to answer your questions. I am going to unmute John O'Brien. John, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, good. If Pruitt is a functionary of the Trump administration, how would, as long as there's a Republican Congress in the House and the Senate, how can we really accomplish much of anything? We can do a lot of infighting now, but it seems to me the real issue is the midterms elections. I mean, there's a tremendous amount going on, and I don't understand what we can do beyond that. I mean, except, collect small sums of money from individual people and try to do some of the things that you're talking about. But the real issue are the midterms. If they win the midterms, I don't know, it's sort of like I want to move to Canada or something.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, John. We have your question down. I am going to mute you, and I'm going to go to Phoebe. Phoebe, what's your question?
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering if that part of the conversation, it seems to me to make sense to talk about the Farm Bill that is also under consideration this year by the U.S. Congress, because so much environmental degradation is caused by our agriculture system. And the Farm Bill is only discussed and adopted every 5 years, and controls determines the priorities and spending of about $1 trillion of the national budget, which is, I think, only second in, the amount spent after the Defense Department. Again, so much environmental degradation is through our ag system that the genetically engineered crops are engineered to accept massive amounts of pesticides, and the confined animal feedlot factory farms are, just produce an awful lot of waste in water pollution and all sorts of other side effects. There's a dead zone the size of New Jersey now at the Gulf of Mexico because the Mississippi River drains the farm fields in the Midwest and brings all the pesticides and fertilizers into the Gulf of Mexico, and nothing can live there now. That should be a part of the conversation, that it's Pruitt, but it's also Purdue. It's also the Ag Department.
Okay. Do you just want a response to that, or do you have a specific question?
Well, I think they're they're hand in hand. I think we need to talk about both of these cabinet members and their departments, and because exactly as Pruitt had been somebody who on the outside was trying to destroy the EPA. Purdue was somebody who, gamed the farm subsidy system to make his millions and was brought in to continue that system, which is, just a polluting system that props up the transnational, ag corporations. It has nothing to do with farming. It has to do with business.
Well, we actually have on the call today our food and agricultural campaigner who's happy to answer the question if we can get around to it and address your concerns around the food, the farm bill. But
I
it's
guess
a really
my
great concern.
Question is just about the timing, that this seems to be the only time. This is the time to bring up, if we're going to be, and I think it's a great idea, to bring up the specific questions at town hall meetings and campaign events, so forth. But this is the time when they are discussing, they're already, quote unquote, negotiating the farm bill, which means, Washington is swarming with agribusiness, lobbyists, and we need to push them on this too. And they're the same thing, essentially.
Okay. Well, I want to get to some more questions here, but thanks for your concerns on that, and we'll try to address it on this call.
Okay.
All right. And we are going to, let's just start with those, the question from John O'Brien, if we can. John has a question about what we can do when we have a Republican-controlled Congress, legitimate concerns, and what about the midterm elections? What can we do between now and the midterm elections?
Yeah, I don't. Hey, John, it's Lucas. I don't actually see these things as necessarily competing. I see a lot of the work that we're doing now as setting the necessary framework for getting rid of Pruitt under the next Congress. I think that if we don't start planting those seeds now and establishing what an aggressive agenda to get members of Congress on record in favor of firing Pruitt, if we don't start that work now and build momentum towards it, it's not going to be seen as a priority when they in the next Congress. And I think to some extent there's an honesty here, is that we need to start asking about this now, because many of them are up for re-election, and we want the mandate to fire Pruitt to feel like it has an actual strength and legitimacy coming off of the election itself. So I think that, I would like more than anything to see him back in Oklahoma tomorrow, but we are talking about building the serious infrastructure to get rid of him over the coming months. And I think that the election is part of that thinking, and it's a feature, not a bug.
I wanted to add one. I wanted to add one thing on what Lucas just said, which is a couple of other things to think about is that we've actually seen efforts to really call out administrators in the different agencies be successful. It hasn't been that there hasn't been scandals that have caused administrators to walk out the door. So I think that there are ways that raising things, including making it so that there's Republican senators that feel uncomfortable with some of the things that are being raised about Pruitt, and Democrats really calling into question about whether or not they'd be effective, it actually does impact right now their ability not just to have their job, but how much leeway Pruitt really has to dismantle the agency. So I think it is both working towards what happens in November and what can happen afterwards, but I also think there's a really real thing to be thinking about right now, which is we're trying to take away the power that Pruitt has and the amount of work that he's able to do right now to dismantle everything that we care about. And the more that we chip away at his credibility, and the more that we actually make sure that senators are raising into question what he's doing out in the field, the bigger impact we can have in making sure that he's not any longer the most effective Trump administrator, effective in the lens of how much can he work for big business and how much can he dismantle environmental laws from behind the scenes. So I do think it's both.
Yeah, and I would just, like, the one thing that I would add in addition to that is that Ann Gorsuch, the mother of the stolen Supreme Court seat, she was the EPA administrator under Ronald Reagan, and a very conservative anti-EPA administration, and probably the most controversial administrator up until Scott Pruitt. She was taken out by scandal too. She was taken out by like a critical mass of opposition, and it didn't take like Congress played a role, but like to say that like it's impossible to get rid of these very dangerous figures just because of the composition of Congress doesn't put us in a good position to actually like begin the work of possibly successfully doing that.
Great. Well, thanks for the questions. I know there's still many of you that have questions lingering, but we're going to move on to a couple more topics, and we're going to have another round of Q&A just before the end of the call. So hold your questions. Thanks.
All right.
Great.
So, hi. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to introduce you, Jenny, and we're going to move on to Jenny, who's really going to talk about why it's really important for us to really demonstrate that a ton of people agree that it's time for Pruitt to go.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, so hey, everyone. My name is Jenny Bach, and I'm also a regional organizer, work with folks in the Northeast. I just wanted to give you all a little more information about the actual, tactics that we're using to put pressure, to build the public pressure that we need to create this scandal and in the public discourse that Lucas is talking about that we need to really force Pruitt to resign. So Liz mentioned a lot of tactics that we're going to be rolling out this spring leading up until May, but I want to just hone in on the petition because this is a key tactic that we will need your help with. So basically, we are launching a national petition where we're calling for, Congress to publicly commit to calling for Pruitt to resign. And this is going to be a digital petition as well as a paper petition. Similar. We do a lot of petitions online, but this petition, it's not just about collecting, a huge quantity of online signatures. We really need to show that there is support for Pruitt to resign, from the grassroots, from folks in the field, folks on the ground, from folks like you. And so like a lot of the very successful movements we've been seeing, we need really both to show our strength. So basically, we're going to be launching this paper petition version for you all to start using to collect petition signatures in your communities next week. And look out for materials, a toolkit we're going to be sending out. But basically, we have about a little over a month or, 2 months, give or take, to really develop this support that we need to really make a lot of noise around why, Pruitt needs to go now and we can't wait any longer, and really to make this, to the level of scandal that we need in order for him to feel the pressure to resign. We're going to be working with folks to do events, in their communities to gather support for the petition. Right after I talk, we're going to have my co-organizer, Brianna, just give you some tips on how to collect petition signatures. But yeah, basically, April is Earth Month, so that's a great time to be out in the field, talking to folks and why they should support Pruitt to be fired. It shouldn't be that hard of an ask. So actually with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bree to talk a little bit more about, how to go about starting this outreach and collecting signatures for our petition.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna Steele, and I'm also a regional organizer with Friends of the Earth. And I'm going to now share some tips for really how to collect petition signatures for our Fire Pruitt petition through tabling, so being able to set up a table in a public space to talk to interested passerbyers about the issue, also through canvassing, being able to initiate direct contact with individuals, in your community. So first off, just focusing on how to talk to people about the issue. So the key point is that we really can't afford for Pruitt to stay in office any longer. You know, we are building towards 2018 when we'll win back one of the houses of Congress, and Senate Democrats will be able to exercise more power in calling for committee hearings and investigations into Pruitt's handlings of the EPA. And also we talk about the issue, our action toolkit that we will be sending you all after this call will have messaging and more background info about some of the egregious things that Pruitt has done to destroy our environment and why he needs to go. And not just why he needs to go in the short term, but also, as Lucas and Liz were saying, explaining the long-term view, how he is really unfit for any public office. So to give you all just briefly some tips on tabling and getting petition signatures, there are sort of four main things. The first is making sure to go to high traffic areas where people might agree with your issue, and making sure that you smile and make eye contact. The second thing is really keeping your ask short. So one sentence. For example, do you want to sign our petition calling on Congress to fire Pruitt? And if people ask you for more information, a really good example of something you could say is that EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt is unfit to run the EPA. He is corrupt and colludes with polluters. He rejects the science of climate change. He is intentionally failing to enforce our environmental laws and give polluters a free pass. And he wastes our taxpayer dollars. He's wasting our taxpayer dollars on indulgent travel and expenses. And so then you could ask, will you sign this petition to Senator X to get them to take action to fire Scott Pruitt from his position as head of the EPA? And so the third thing, after you make your ask, is making sure to get this clipboard into the other person's hand as quickly as possible when you're talking to them. And then our fourth point is just making sure to ask people if they want to get more involved. So we're using petitions not just to garner public support for an issue, but also it's a part of a larger outreach tool to really find more people who want to get more involved and do this with us. So in order to use it as an outreach tool, we'd eventually want to make sure that the petition signatures get back to us and that we conduct timely follow-up with folks who are interested in being more involved. And so the other organizers and I, frequently talk to volunteers about how to follow up and use petitions as an outreach tool, and we are more than happy to talk with anyone on this call about how to do that. The petition that you will get will actually have a checkbox on it where someone can check if they are interested in volunteering as well. And so next, just really briefly, we're going to, now that we've talked about, a training on how to table and canvass and get petition signatures, we want to just take a few minutes to brainstorm about where we should go to do this, to table and collect petition signatures. As everybody has already mentioned, Earth Day is Sunday, April 22nd. So that means next month there will be a lot of Earth Day and environmental-themed events happening, and those are perfect opportunities for collecting petition signatures. And there are also, local science marches happening on Saturday, April 14th, and also the following week. And you can find out if there is a local march near you, at marchforscience.com. So right now we'd love to hear from you all if you have any ideas that you can share as far as where to go to collect petition signatures, where to set up a table, where to canvass, and you can raise your hand by pressing 1 on your phone, and I'll call on you to share your ideas. So we're just sharing ideas, not questions. So if you have ideas, just press 1 and I'll go to you. Oh, perfect. So first, Jane Actually, yes, Jane Mosby.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Hey, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So many grocery stores in the area will let you do something in front of them, will let you have petitions. And that's a good place to go because a lot of people come in and out all the time.
Yes, that is a really good place to go. Thank you, Jane, for sharing. Let's see. We've got quite a number of hands, so I'm going to just keep moving. Let's see. Janet Henderson.
Hi. I want to suggest that you go to I live in a small town with a bunch of small towns around, and a lot of signatures get collected at the local, what we call dump, but was really the transfer station. And it's a perfect place to collect signatures supporting the EPA. I also would like to say one more thing is that I have seen some emails that have linked the EPA with Monsanto as a common enemy because the EPA has rescinded the bans on this pesticide that Monsanto makes. So a battle cry could be stop giving the EPA a bad name. They're painting a Snidely Whiplash mustache on the EPA and linking them with Monsanto, which is wrong. The EPA is totally separate, and it should always be that way.
Yes. Thank you so much, Janet, for sharing and for that really great idea and suggestion. Let's see. Neela Patel, would you like to share?
That's right. And I suggest that you consider if you're part of a faith-based organization that cares about the future of the planet for next generations, churches can be a great place. I know that my church has a lot of social justice work around, saving the planet, and people there would be really happy. I'd probably get 100 signatures in a single morning there.
Great. That's wonderful. And let's see, David Gibson.
Hi, all. David Gibson.
Hi.
In Florida. I'm in Florida. I'm with Peace, Justice, Sustainability, Florida. So here's an idea. Last year, we organized the People's Climate March around Mar-a-Lago, and what we did was we put up a big banner. It was like, 5 by 8 or something like that. It had a picture of Mar-a-Lago sinking under the sea, and it said something about, Trump taking the EPA seriously, and we had people come and sign it. Something like this could be done. We've done this kind of thing before and other things. If you have a big public event or a rally, the nice thing about this is you multiply the effect of the petition because you can advertise it to the media. It's a big visual. They come out, they take pictures, they might even put it on the evening news if you're in a media market that isn't a big media market like New York or LA or something like that. If you're in the Midwest, it's probably going to be pretty easy for you to get the local media to come out and film this thing, and then it becomes a big public deal. And you can actually then take this petition around to different events and continue to build a big sort of push on the issue. So we're going to be doing that again this year, and we're going to find a way to combine this petition with the big banner we've already got going to Trump. I've got some other ideas, but that's the one I wanted to share today.
Thank you so much, David. I really, really appreciate that. Let's see. Charles E.
Well, Brianna, before you go, I just wanted to build on what was just said about actions and delivering petitions. In the beginning of the call, I went over the fact that we're going to be having a day of action on Pruitt's birthday, May 9th. So everyone should be keeping that in the back of their head as they're getting petition signatures, because you will, in fact, have a chance to do the exact same thing of delivering those signatures to senators and representatives in your state after we gather them all.
Thank you, Liz. Let's see. And Charles E.
Yeah, that's me.
Great. Go ahead. You can share your idea.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you could hear me. Actually, I wanted to build on the gentleman that was talking about Mar-a-Lago as well. Just because I had heard that Florida is the only state that has the exemption of offshore drilling. And I find it I'm a Floridian myself, so I don't want to overdo it, but it's quite obvious that to me at least, that it is the winner White House, and it's certainly wrong if he's going to authorize that in every other state. The one that I had heard specifically was Virginia, and then forbid it in his own state. And also we could incorporate that with the EPA during the Mar-a-Lago event.
Okay. Thank you, Charles, for just adding on the information. We're going to wrap up, but I saw a couple of comments from folks who said maybe some of the ideas were presented a little too fast. So we'll be sure to include those ideas from tonight's call in the wrap-up materials in case you couldn't hear them. So I will pass things over to Liz.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining today. This is a really important moment for us to be escalating and making sure that we are really building up a pretty robust campaign calling for Pruitt to be fired. And just a reminder, there's a couple of different reasons why. One is to make sure that we're undermining his power and that he can do as little damage right now as possible. Two, that we've actually seen with other administrators that has been the thing that's caused them to end up either quitting or losing their job. And then three is to set the stage for really making sure that come November and beyond, that if there's an opportunity for hearings and other accountability, that it is in fact something that people feel like they've been demanded. So here's what's going to come out coming out of this call. Some of you may have already seen the online survey that we put out to some people, really asking for what things you're interested in doing on the campaign. So keep your eye out for that. So any of you who haven't filled out that survey yet, we're going to be sending it to you. Two, we're going to be sending a one-pager about the campaign that lays out some of the reasons behind it that Lucas laid out in the beginning, the timeline that I walked you through for actions, what we have coming up as well. And then next week we're going to be, as well as the tips that Brianna talked through about how to do petitioning and tabling. Next week we're going to be sending you a complete action toolkit, which includes the Fire Pruitt petition text, a sign-up sheet to start collecting petition signatures, sample messaging and tabling tips, as well as some other ideas. And then in coming weeks, we'll be organizing additional calls to really start planning the day of action on May 9th and other pieces. We'll also be reaching out to you individually to figure out what you can do in your state. So, and if you have specifically additional questions, you can shoot a really quick email to organize@fo.org, which is ORGANIZE@fo.org. We'll include that email in the follow-up materials that we send out to you. Now, there's a quick little quirky thing that we like to do at the end of our calls just to kind of wrap up for the night. So what I was going to do is actually take everyone off of mute really quickly, and on the count of 3, we're all going to scream, "Fire Pruitt," just to remind ourselves what our goal is right now. So I'm going to take everybody off of mute, and then on the count of 3, we're all going to scream, "Fire Pruitt," and then we're going to be done for the evening. So, 1, 2, 3. Fire! 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 Fire!
Pruitt. Great.
Lock him up.
One more. Fire Pruitt.
And on that note, have a good night, and we will talk to you all.
Lock him up.
Fire Pruitt.
Thank you.
Time Federer.
You can
Thank
keep the
you.
door open.
Thank you.